Sometimes the things we abandon say more about us than what we save. In a small frontier town, a dying mountain lion becomes the test of one man's heart. When a sick cougar staggers into Dry Creek foaming at the mouth, the townsfolk see only danger. They want it dead by sunrise. But Levi Brandt, a poor widowed cowboy, sees something different, a suffering creature just like himself. Against the town's fury, Levi takes the dying cat to an old cabin and begins a desperate fight to save it. Can healing this abandoned animal heal his own broken heart? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from in the comments down below. And if this story truly touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you, a tale that'll stay with you long after the sun sets. The morning sun had barely cleared the eastern ridge when Levi Brandt stepped out onto his porch, coffee mug warming his weathered hands. At 58, his frame still carried the lean strength of a lifetime spent working cattle and mending fences, though his dark hair had gone mostly silver at the temples. The lines around his eyes spoke of years squinting into the wind, but also of laughter that had grown scarce in recent times. His cabin sat at the end of a rutted dirt road 3 miles from Dry Creek proper. It wasn't much. 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, and a porch that creaked when the wind blew hard. But it had been home for 30 years. Sarah had made it beautiful once, with curtains she'd sewn herself and wildflowers in mason jars on the windowsills. Now those small touches had faded, and Levi hadn't found the heart to replace them. He sipped his coffee and watched the valley below begin to stir. Smoke rose from chimneys in town. Somewhere a rooster crowed late to its duties. The land stretched out in shades of brown and gold, dotted with sage and juniper, hemmed in by mountains that still held snow on their peaks even in late spring. It was hard country, the kind that demanded respect and gave little back except the knowledge that you'd survived another season. Levi had come to this valley as a young man, following work and opportunity. He'd met Sarah at a church social, her laugh carrying across the room like music. She'd been a veterinarian's daughter from a ranching family, practical and kind, with gentle hands and a fierce determination to heal anything broken. They'd married that same year, and she'd taught him everything she knew about animals, not just cattle and horses, but the wild things too. Sarah had a gift. She could calm a spooked horse with a whisper, set a broken wing without getting pecked, and nurse half-dead creatures back to health in the spare room she'd converted into a makeshift clinic. People used to bring her injured animals they'd found. Fawns orphaned by coyotes, owls tangled in barbed wire, even a badger once that had gotten into poison. She never turned anything away. The spare room still held remnants of her work. Cages stacked in corners, bags of feed gone stale, and on the shelf by the window her medicine journal. Levi looked at it every morning, though he rarely opened it anymore. The leather cover had darkened with age and handling. The pages inside filled with Sarah's careful handwriting, remedies she'd learned from her father, notes on treatments, sketches of plants and their properties. It was her life's work, distilled into one battered book. She'd been gone 2 years now. Cancer had taken her in the winter, slowly and without mercy. Levi had sat by her bedside every day, holding her hand, helpless in a way he'd never felt before. All her knowledge, all her healing touch, and she couldn't save herself. In the end, she'd made him promise to keep going, to not let grief turn him hard. He'd promised, but keeping that promise had proven harder than any day's work he'd ever done. Since Sarah's passing, Levi had shrunk his world down to the essentials. He took odd jobs on neighboring ranches, mending fence, breaking horses, helping with roundups, anything that paid enough to keep him fed and the roof patched. The work kept his hands busy and his mind from wandering too far into dark places. He spoke to people only when necessary, came to town only when he needed supplies, and spent his evenings alone on the porch, watching the sun set over the same mountains Sarah had loved. The people of Dry Creek had mostly left him to his grief. They were good folks by and large, but they carried their own burdens. The town had seen better days. The railroad had bypassed them 20 years back, and the mines had played out shortly after. What remained was a community of ranchers, shopkeepers and families who decided that staying was easier than leaving. They helped each other when times got hard, looked after their own, and viewed outsiders with polite suspicion. Sheriff Raymond Dalton was one of the few who still checked on Levi regularly. Ray was in his mid-50s, solid and steady, with a moustache he kept meticulously trimmed and a star he wore with quiet authority. He'd been friends with Sarah's father, had known Sarah since she was a girl. He'd stop by Levi's place once a month or so, ostensibly to ask about fence lines or cattle movements, but really just to make sure Levi was still eating and hadn't done anything foolish. Then there was Doc Harriet Mills, who ran the only veterinary practice within 50 miles. She was 65, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, with steel-grey hair she kept in a bun and no patience for nonsense. She'd worked alongside Sarah for years, respected her knowledge, even when it strayed into what Doc Harriet called folk remedies and wishful thinking. Since Sarah's death, Doc Harriet had made it known she expected Levi to bring her any injured animals he came across, though they both knew he wouldn't. He couldn't bear to walk into that clinic and not see Sarah there. Mayor Franklin Pierce presided over Dry Creek with the enthusiasm of a man trying to bail out a sinking ship with a teaspoon. He was younger than most town leaders, barely 40, and full of ideas about revitalization and economic development that mostly came to nothing. He wore suits that looked out of place against the dusty backdrop of the town, and he worried constantly about appearances and what people in the state capital might think. Still, his heart was generally in the right place, even if his solutions rarely matched the problems. The town itself centered around a single main street. A general store anchored one end, selling everything from flour to firearms. The saloon, really more of a restaurant that served whiskey, occupied the middle, flanked by Doc Harriet's veterinary office and the post office. The sheriff's office and jail sat at the far end, next to the church. Houses spread out from there in no particular pattern, following the contours of the land. A school served the valley's children, and twice a month a circuit preacher came through to hold services. It was a place where everyone knew everyone, where secrets were hard to keep and grudges were long remembered. It was also a place increasingly defined by fear of losing what little they had, fear of change, fear of anything that might threaten the delicate balance that kept them surviving. That fear expressed itself in different ways. Coyotes near the school meant organized hunts. Drought meant prayers and rationing. Sickness in the cattle meant quarantines, and sometimes killing healthy animals just to be safe. The people of Dry Creek had learned that uncertainty was dangerous, and the safest response to danger was often elimination. Levi understood that fear, even if he didn't share it the way others did. He'd lost everything that mattered, and in that loss had found a strange kind of freedom. What else could the world take from him? The worst had already happened. Sarah was gone, and he was just marking time until he could join her. He finished his coffee and went back inside to gather his tools. Old Man Henderson had asked him to help repair a windmill on his property, and the work would take most of the day. Levi pulled on his work gloves, the leather soft and shaped to his hands from years of use. As he did, his gaze fell again on Sarah's medicine journal. On impulse, he crossed the room and picked it up. The leather was cool and smooth under his fingers. He opened it to a random page and found himself looking at a diagram of feverfew, with notes in Sarah's handwriting about its uses for inflammation and fever. Below that, a recipe for a poultice. Below that, a little sketch of a rabbit she'd treated once, recovered and fat. He could almost hear her voice, patient and warm, explaining how the natural world held answers if you knew where to look and had the patience to learn. She believed in giving things a chance, in not giving up too quickly, in the possibility of healing even when it seemed impossible. Levi closed the journal and set it back on the shelf. Then he gathered his tools, locked the cabin, and headed for his truck. The day was warming up, promising to be clear and mild. Good weather for working outdoors. Good weather for keeping his mind occupied. As he drove the rough road into town, dust rising behind his wheels, he had no way of knowing that everything was about to change. that before the sun set, he would make a choice that would force him to remember Sarah's lessons, to open that journal again, and to discover whether a broken man could still find the strength to save something other than himself. The town of Dry Creek lay ahead, quiet in the morning light. But even from a distance, Levi could sense something different in the air. A tension, a gathering of people near the center of town. He slowed his truck, frowning. It was too early for any scheduled gathering, and the cluster of vehicles looked urgent rather than social. Something had happened, something that had drawn the whole town out into the street. Levi's hands tightened on the steering wheel. In a place like Dry Creek, that kind of commotion usually meant trouble. And in his experience, trouble had a way of spreading, touching everything and everyone before it was through. He drove on, heading toward whatever awaited him, the medicine journal still sitting on its shelf back home, waiting for hands that had forgotten how to heal. The mountain lion lay in the middle of the town square, flanked on three sides by pickups and people with rifles. Even from 50 yards away, Levi could see it was in bad shape. The animal's tawny coat was matted and dull, its sides heaving with labored breaths. White foam flecked its muzzle, and as Levi watched, it coughed, a wet rattling sound that carried in the still morning air. He parked his truck at the edge of the crowd and got out slowly. 20 or 30 people had gathered, most of them men, all of them armed. The mood was tense, voices raised in argument and fear. Children pressed against storefront windows, their mothers keeping them back with firm hands. The lion lay surrounded, but seemed barely aware of the people around it. Its eyes were half closed, glazed with fever. Sheriff Dalton stood at the front of the crowd, his rifle held at a ready position but not aimed. He was trying to maintain order, his voice calm but strained. "Everyone just stay back. We don't need anyone getting hurt here." "That thing's got the rabies, Ray!" someone shouted. "You can see the foam on its mouth. We need to put it down before it goes after somebody." "My children walk this street," a woman added, her voice shrill with fear. What if it had come through an hour from now when they were heading to school? Levi pushed through the crowd, his eyes fixed on the lion. As he got closer, he could see more details. The animal was young, maybe 2 or 3 years old, probably male from the size. It should have weighed 140 pounds. Levi guessed it weighed barely 100. Its ribs showed through its coat, but it was something else that caught his attention, something that made him stop and look closer. Around the lion's neck, barely visible through the matted fur, was a faint line of scar tissue, like something had been wrapped around its throat once, tight enough to leave a mark. A collar maybe, or a snare it had worked itself free from. The cat had suffered before, survived before, and now it was suffering again. "That's not rabies," Levi heard himself say. The crowd turned to look at him. Sheriff Dalton's expression shifted from relief to concern. "Levi, glad you're here, but I think we need to—" "It's not rabies," Levi repeated louder. He stepped closer to the lion, ignoring the gasps and warnings from the crowd. The animal's breathing was labored, its body temperature clearly elevated, even from several feet away. "Look at it. Really look. Rabies makes animals aggressive, wild. This one can barely move. The foam," someone started, "could be a dozen things." Levi knelt down, still keeping a safe distance. The lion's eyes tracked him slightly, showing awareness but no aggression. "Distemper, maybe. Respiratory infection. See how it's coughing? See the discharge from its nose? That's not rabies." "You're not a veterinarian, Levi," Mayor Pierce said, stepping forward. He looked nervous in his clean shirt and pressed trousers, out of place amid the dust and fear. "We can't take that risk. If you're wrong, then call Doc Harriet. Let her look at it." "I'm not getting near that thing." Doc Harriet's voice came from the crowd. She pushed through to the front, medical bag in hand, but her face was set. "Even if you're right about it not being rabies, it's clearly dying. Most humane thing is to put it down quick. It's treatable," Levi said, his voice quiet but firm. "Sarah treated distemper in wild animals before. I've seen her do it. It takes time and care, but it can be done." The mention of Sarah's name created a ripple of discomfort through the crowd. People shifted, looked away. Sheriff Dalton sighed. "Levi, I know you miss her, we all do. But This isn't about missing her. Levi stood up, his jaw set. This is about not killing something just because we're scared. That animal is sick and suffering. It needs help, not a bullet. It's a predator, another rancher spoke up. Even if you're right and it lives, what's to stop it from coming back, from going after our livestock? Our children? It wandered in here because it's sick and confused, Levi said. Once it's healthy, it'll go back to the wild where it belongs. Mountain lions avoid people when they're well. Mayor Pierce shook his head. I can't allow this, Levi. I'm responsible for the safety of this town. That animal dies today, by sundown at the latest. That's final. Then let me take it, Levi said. The crowd went silent. Sheriff Dalton stared at him. What? Let me take it away from here, up into the hills. There's an old cabin. Sarah's family's trapping cabin hasn't been used in years. I'll take it there, away from town, away from everyone. If it dies far from here. If it lives, he paused, choosing his words carefully. If it lives, then we've done something decent. That's insane, Doc Harriet said bluntly. That animal could have any number of diseases. You could get yourself killed, or sick, or both. That's my choice to make. And when you bring some disease back to town, someone shouted. When you get sick and come looking for help? I won't come back until it's safe, Levi said. I give you my word. Mayor Pierce looked uncertain, glancing between Levi and the lion. The political calculation was clear on his face. The town wanted the problem gone, but they also didn't want blood on their hands, if there was another option. How would you even move it? It's still dangerous. I'll build a travois. Drag it behind my truck. It's weak enough now it won't be able to do much. Sheriff Dalton rubbed his jaw, thinking. Finally, he looked at the mayor. If he's willing to take it away from here, that solves our immediate problem. We're rid of the danger, and no one has to watch us shoot a suffering animal. And if he gets hurt, the mayor pressed. Then that's on him, Doc Harriet said, though her tone suggested she didn't like it. But Levi, if you're going to do this foolish thing, at least let me give you some supplies. Antibiotics, fluids, things that might help if you're right about it being distemper. I don't have money for... Consider it a donation, she cut him off. I'm not letting you do this with nothing but Sarah's folk remedies, she paused. Though if you still have her journal, bring it. Some of what she knew actually worked. The mayor looked around at the crowd, sensing the shift in mood. People were nodding, relieved at a solution that didn't require them to shoot an animal in their town square. All right, he said finally. You have until noon to get it out of here, Levi. And I want your word. You don't come back to town until you're sure there's no risk of spreading disease. No contact with anyone. Understood? Understood. Levi went back to his truck and unloaded the lumber and rope he'd been bringing to Henderson's place. Working quickly, he fashioned a crude travois, 2 long poles with crosspieces designed to drag behind the truck like a sled. The crowd watched in tense silence as he worked, some people clearly thinking he was crazy. Others just relieved the problem was being removed. When the travois was ready, Levi approached the lion slowly, talking in a low, steady voice. Easy now. I'm not going to hurt you. Just need to get you somewhere safe. The lion's eyes followed him, filled with fever and confusion, but also something else, a flicker of awareness that this human was different from the threatening circle around it. Up close, Levi could see the old scar around its neck more clearly. Whatever had caught this animal before had held it tight, and it had fought free. It was a survivor, just like him, just like Sarah had been, fighting right up until the end. He got a rope around the lion's body, being as gentle as possible while securing it to the travois. The animal was too weak to struggle much, just a low growl of protest that ended in another racking cough. Foam and blood flecked its muzzle. Time was running short. With help from the sheriff, they loaded the travois onto the truck bed and secured it. Levi climbed into the driver's seat, his hands shaking slightly now that the immediate action was done. Through his rearview mirror, he could see the lion lying on the travois, its eyes closed, sides heaving. Doc Harriet appeared at his window with a canvas bag. Antibiotics, IV fluids, vitamins. Instructions are written inside. Bring back what you don't use. She paused. And Levi? Sarah would be proud of you. Foolish but proud, he nodded, not trusting his voice, and started the engine. As he pulled away from the town square, he saw people watching from doorways and windows. Some looked relieved. Some looked angry. A few looked thoughtful, as if they weren't quite sure what they'd just witnessed. Levi drove slowly through town and out onto the mountain road, the weight of the lion and the travois pulling at his truck. Behind him, Dry Creek grew smaller, and ahead, the mountains rose up vast and indifferent. He'd made a promise, taken on a burden he might not be able to carry. But for the first time in 2 years, he felt something besides the hollow ache of grief. He felt purpose. The road up into the high country was more memory than reality. Weeds grew in the wheel ruts, and saplings had begun reclaiming the edges where they'd once been kept clear. Levi's truck bounced and lurched over rocks and washouts, moving slowly to spare the lion any unnecessary jolting. Every few minutes, he'd glance in the mirror to check on his passenger. The cat lay still, its breathing visible but shallow. The journey took 3 hours that felt like 6. The terrain grew rougher as he climbed, the air cooler and thinner. Pine trees replaced the juniper and sage of the lower elevations, and patches of old snow lingered in the shadows. This was country that had once been familiar to Levi. He and Sarah used to come up here in the early years of their marriage, before her practice had gotten too busy. They'd hike the trails, camp by the streams, and sometimes stay at the old cabin that had been in her family for generations. He hadn't been back since her funeral. They'd scattered some of her ashes here, at her request, in a meadow where wildflowers grew thick in summer. The memory of that day was sharp and painful. The weight of the urn in his hands, the way the wind had caught the ashes and carried them into the sunlight, the unbearable silence that followed. The cabin appeared suddenly as he rounded a bend. It sat in a small clearing, surrounded by tall pines, built from logs that had darkened with age. The roof sagged slightly on one side, and one of the windows was broken, but overall it looked more or less intact. Sarah's father had built it as a young man, back when trapping was still profitable in these mountains. Later, it had become a family retreat, a place to escape the pressures of town life. Levi stopped the truck and sat for a moment, his hands on the wheel. He hadn't been sure he could do this, come back to a place so filled with memories of Sarah. But the lion needed shelter, and this was the only option that made sense. Remote enough to keep everyone safe, solid enough to provide protection from the weather. He got out and walked to the cabin's door. From his pocket, he pulled out a rusty iron key that he'd carried for 2 years, but never used. Sarah had pressed it into his hand the day before she died, her fingers weak but insistent. "Promise me you won't let go of that place," she'd whispered. "Promise me you'll go back someday." He'd promised, though he'd never believed he would actually keep it. The key turned stiffly in the lock, and the door swung open with a creak. Inside, dust motes danced in the shafts of light from the windows. The single room was small but serviceable. A pot-belly stove in one corner, a narrow bed frame without a mattress, a table and 2 chairs, shelves along one wall. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust and mouse droppings. A stack of old trapping supplies still occupied one corner, but it was shelter, and it was far from town. That was enough. Levi spent the next hour preparing the space. He swept out the worst of the debris, cleared the stove, and gathered wood from the forest to build a fire. The temperature would drop quickly once the sun went down, and both he and the lion would need warmth. As he worked, memories kept surfacing, Sarah laughing as she tried to start a fire, Sarah reading by lamplight while rain drummed on the roof, Sarah's hand in his as they sat on the porch watching stars. When the cabin was as ready as he could make it, he returned to the truck. The lion hadn't moved. Up close, Levi could see the animal's eyes were now completely closed, its breathing more labored than before. Blood had dried around its nostrils. He needed to move quickly. Getting the lion inside proved harder than he'd expected. Even weakened, the animal was heavy and awkward to carry. Levi fashioned a sling from the travois poles and dragged it inch by inch toward the cabin door, his back and shoulders burning with the effort. The lion stirred once, a weak growl of protest, but didn't fight him. Finally, he got the animal positioned in the corner farthest from the door, in a spot where it would be warm from the stove, but not too hot. He covered it with an old horse blanket he'd found in the truck, tucking it gently around the trembling body. This close, he could feel the heat radiating from the fevered animal. Its muzzle was dry and cracked, its breathing rapid and shallow. Levi sat back on his heels, suddenly aware of the magnitude of what he'd taken on. He was alone in the wilderness with a dying mountain lion, armed with nothing but Doc Harriet's medical supplies and his fading memories of Sarah's teachings. If the lion died, and the odds were it would, he'd have failed. If it somehow lived, he'd have to figure out what came next. But those were worries for later. Right now, the animal needed immediate care. He went back to the truck and retrieved Doc Harriet's bag and his own supplies. As he did, he realized he'd forgotten something important, Sarah's medicine journal. It was still sitting on the shelf back at his cabin, 3 hours away. He cursed himself for the oversight. That journal held detailed notes on treating distemper, on herbal remedies for fever and infection, on nursing sick animals back to health, but he couldn't leave the lion long enough to go back and retrieve it. He'd have to rely on memory and Doc Harriet's conventional medicines. By the time he returned inside, full darkness had fallen. He lit the old oil lamps he'd found, casting a warm glow through the cabin. The lion lay in its corner, motionless except for the rise and fall of its sides. Levi knelt beside it and opened Doc Harriet's bag. Inside were antibiotics in pill and injection form, bags of IV fluid with tubing, vitamins, anti-inflammatories, and a handwritten note in Doc's precise script. If it's distemper, start broad-spectrum antibiotics immediately. Secondary infections are what usually kill them. Keep fluids going. Dehydration is critical. The fever needs to come down. Good luck. You're going to need it. Levi drew up the first dose of antibiotics into a syringe. His hands were steadier than he'd expected. Maybe muscle memory, from all the times he'd watched Sarah do this, from the few times she'd let him help. He approached the lion slowly, talking in a low voice. Easy now. This is going to help. I promise. The injection went into the scruff of the neck, quick and clean. The lion barely reacted, too weak to do more than twitch. Levi set up the IV line next. Though finding a vein on a dehydrated, thick-furred animal in dim lamplight proved nearly impossible. After several tries, he gave up and decided to try again in the morning. For now, he'd have to rely on getting fluids into the animal by mouth. He mixed water with a small amount of broth from his provisions, making it thin enough to swallow but with some nutrition. Using a turkey baster he'd found in the cabin's cupboard, he carefully dribbled the liquid into the side of the lion's mouth. Most of it ran out again, but some went down. The cat's throat worked in a weak swallow. It was something. Not much, but something. Levi worked through the night, taking the lion's temperature with a thermometer from the medical kit, checking its breathing, forcing small amounts of fluid every hour. He kept the fire burning, adjusting the blanket to keep the animal comfortable. The fever raged, 106 degrees, dangerously high. He applied cool water to the lion's paws and ears, trying to bring the temperature down without shocking its system. Around 3 in the morning, the lion had a seizure. Its body went rigid, limbs trembling, eyes rolling back. Levi held it as best he could, keeping it from injuring itself, his heart pounding with fear and helplessness. The seizure lasted less than a minute, but felt like an hour. When it passed, the lion lay limp and barely breathing. Levi sat with his back against the wall, the lion's head in his lap. And for the first time in 2 years, he prayed. Not the formal prayers from church, but the desperate kind, raw and honest. He asked for guidance, for strength, for a chance to save this one life when he hadn't been able to save the one that mattered most. Outside, the forest was silent, except for the wind in the pines. The fire crackled in the stove. The lion breathed. And Levi waited for the dawn, hoping it would bring answers he didn't yet have. Dawn came slowly, grey light filtering through the dusty windows. Levi woke with a start, realizing he'd dozed off, with his hand resting on the lion's side. The animal was still breathing, shallow but steady. Its fever seemed slightly lower, though still dangerously elevated. Small victories. He added wood to the stove and stepped outside to clear his head. The morning air was cold and sharp, scented with pine and damp earth. His truck sat where he'd left it, dew covering the windshield. The mountains rose around him, indifferent and eternal. He'd committed himself to this place, to this task, for as long as it took. But he was already running low on supplies, and the lion needed more than he had. He'd have to go back to town. The thought made his stomach tighten. He'd promised to stay away, to avoid contact until there was no risk. But the lion would die without proper medical support, and he'd be damned if he'd let that happen after coming this far. By mid-morning, he'd made the difficult journey back down the mountain. His body ached from the sleepless night and the physical labor of caring for the lion. As he drove into Dry Creek, he felt the weight of eyes on him, people watching from windows, stepping out onto porches. Word would already be spreading. Levi Brandt was back. The crazy man who'd taken a dying mountain lion into the wilderness had returned. He parked in front of Doc Harriet's office and climbed out stiffly. The door was locked, but he could see light in the back. He knocked firmly. After a moment, the door opened a crack, and Doc Harriet's sharp eyes peered out at him. "You're supposed to be in quarantine," she said flatly. "The lion's still alive." "Barely. I need more supplies." She studied him for a long moment, then opened the door wider. "Get in here before the whole town sees you." Inside, the clinic smelled of antiseptic and animal fur. Doc Harriet led him to her office and closed the door. "Sit down before you fall down." "You look terrible." Levi sank into a chair. "It has distemper." "I'm sure of it now. High fever, respiratory distress, seizures. I've been giving it the antibiotics you provided, but I need more. IV fluids, too. I can't get enough into it by mouth. You shouldn't have come back." But even as she said it, she was pulling out her battered black medical bag and opening it on the desk. The bag was old leather, worn smooth from years of use, filled with the tools of her trade, syringes, vials, instruments. She'd carried it to ranches and farms across the valley for 4 decades. "If anyone official knew you were here, they'd raise hell." "I don't care about official. I know you don't. That's what worries me." She began pulling items from her supply cabinets. More antibiotics, larger bags of IV solution, vitamins, anti-seizure medication. "How bad are the seizures?" "One last night. About a minute long," she nodded grimly. "That's the neurological phase. If it survives this part, the odds get better. But most don't survive it." She packed the supplies into a cardboard box. "What about you? Any symptoms? Fever, cough, anything?" "I'm fine. You're exhausted and probably malnourished. When's the last time you ate a proper meal?" Levi couldn't remember. Time had become fluid up at the cabin, measured only in the intervals between checking on the lion. Doc Harriet sighed and went to a small refrigerator in the corner, pulling out sandwiches wrapped in paper. "Take these. And there's coffee in the pot. Pour yourself some while I get the rest of what you need." As Levi drank the coffee, Doc Harriet continued gathering supplies. "You know this is insane, right? Even if you're right about it being distemper and not rabies, the survival rate for wild animals is maybe 10%. You're wasting your time and risking your health. Maybe. Sarah wouldn't want you throwing your life away on a lost cause." Sarah never saw a lost cause. Levi set down his coffee cup. "She saw things that needed help and she helped them. That's what I'm doing. This isn't about the lion, is it?" Doc Harriet stopped packing and looked at him directly. "This is about you needing something to save, because you couldn't save her." The words hit like a physical blow. Levi felt his throat tighten. "Does it matter why?" "I suppose not. As long as you come out of it alive." She pushed the box of supplies across the desk. "This is everything I can spare. It should last you 2 weeks if you're careful. After that, you're on your own. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just don't die up there. I've lost enough good people." She paused. "And Levi? That animal is wild. Even if it survives, even if it seems grateful or tame, it's still a predator. Don't forget that." He nodded, though her words barely registered. He was already thinking about getting back to the cabin, about the lion lying in the corner, about all the work still ahead. As he left through the back door to avoid being seen, he nearly collided with someone, a girl of about 12, with dark braids and wide brown eyes. She stepped back quickly, clutching a book to her chest. "Mr. Brandt," she said softly, I just wanted to say thank you for saving the lion. Levi recognized her now, Emma Whitmore, daughter of the seamstress. She was in school with the other valley children, a quiet girl who always seemed to be reading. "You should get inside, Emma. It's not safe to be talking to me right now." "I don't care about safe." Her voice was stronger now, determined. "Everyone else wanted to kill it. You were the only one who tried to help. That matters. Your mother know you're here?" Emma's face fell slightly. "She's sick, at home. She can't know about a lot of things right now." "I'm sorry to hear that." Levi meant it. He knew what it was like to watch someone you loved suffer. "That's why it matters," Emma continued. "What you're doing. My mom says the world is divided into people who turn away from suffering and people who move toward it. You moved toward it. That's brave." Levi didn't feel brave. He felt tired and scared and uncertain. But he nodded to Emma. "You should go home. Take care of your mother. Will the lion live?" "I don't know. I'm going to try my best." Emma smiled, small but genuine. "Then that's all anyone can ask." She hurried off down the alley, leaving Levi standing with his box of supplies and a strange warmth in his chest that felt almost like hope. He loaded the supplies into his truck and took the long way out of town, avoiding the main street. As he passed the last buildings and headed back toward the mountains, he saw Sheriff Dalton's vehicle parked at the turnoff. The sheriff stepped out and raised a hand, not in warning but in acknowledgement, a small gesture that said, "I see you and I'm not stopping you." The drive back up the mountain seemed shorter this time, though no easier. When Levi finally pulled up to the cabin, the afternoon sun was slanting through the trees. He grabbed the supplies and hurried inside, half afraid of what he'd find. The lion was awake. Its eyes were open, tracking him as he entered. The fever glaze had diminished, replaced by something clearer. Still sick, still weak, but present in a way it hadn't been before. When Levi approached, it didn't growl or try to move away. It just watched him with those amber eyes, as if trying to understand who this human was and why he kept coming back. Levi knelt slowly and set down the supplies. "Hey there," he said quietly. "I brought help. Let's see if we can make you feel better." He spent the rest of the daylight hours establishing a proper IV line, this time successfully, and administering the stronger medications Doc Harriet had provided. The lion accepted the ministrations with remarkable patience, as if it understood on some level that this human meant no harm. As night fell again, Levi prepared a thin broth with the supplies he'd brought. This time, when he offered it in a shallow bowl, the lion lapped at it weakly. Not much, but more than it had taken before. Progress, Levi settled in for another long night, his back against the wall, the fire burning low. The lion lay on its side, breathing more easily now, the worst of the crisis perhaps passing. In the lamplight, Levi could see the old scar around its neck clearly, a reminder that this animal had survived hardship before. "You're a fighter," he said softly. "Just like her. Maybe that's why I can't give up on you." Outside, an owl called. The wind picked up, making the old cabin creak. And in the corner, wrapped in a horse blanket, a wild thing began the slow, uncertain journey back toward life. The first week passed in a blur of exhaustion and small victories. Levi fell into a rhythm. Wake before dawn, check the lion's temperature and breathing, administer medications, encourage it to drink, clean its corner, add wood to the fire, sleep in snatches when he could. Time lost its normal meaning. Days blended together, marked only by the gradual improvement or decline of his patient. The lion, he'd started thinking of it as brave, though he hadn't said the name aloud yet, showed remarkable resilience. The fever broke on the fourth day, dropping from dangerous levels to merely elevated. The coughing decreased, though it still racked the animal's body regularly. The seizures continued, unpredictable and terrifying, but they were growing less frequent and less severe. On the fifth day, Brave ate solid food, a piece of dried venison Levi had brought from his stores. The lion took it carefully from his hand, its teeth grazing his palm without pressing down, and chewed slowly. It wasn't much, but it was the first time the animal had shown real appetite. Levi felt a swell of emotion so strong it took his breath away. His eyes stung with tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed in months. He turned away, pretending to tend the fire, and his hand went unconsciously to the chain around his neck, the one that held Sarah's wedding ring. He'd put it there the day after her funeral, unable to bear having her ring sit in a drawer, but equally unable to wear it on his own finger. It rested against his chest now, warm from his body heat, a constant reminder of what he'd lost and what he'd promised. Sarah had fought so hard at the end, even when the doctors said there was nothing more to be done, even when the pain made her gasp and cry out she'd fought. He'd sat by her bedside feeling useless, holding her hand, watching her waste away despite every treatment, every prayer, every desperate hope. In the end, all his love and devotion hadn't been enough to save her, but maybe he could save this. The thought felt both ridiculous and profound. A dying mountain lion was not a substitute for his wife. Nursing an animal back to health would not undo the cancer that had taken Sarah from him. He knew that, but there was something in the act itself, in the simple defiance of death and despair, that felt like honoring her memory rather than trying to replace it. On the 6th day, Brave stood up. It happened in the afternoon, while Levi was changing out the IV bag. The lion shifted, gathered its legs beneath itself, and rose shakily to its feet. It swayed, weak and unsteady, but it was standing. Its amber eyes met Levi's, and for a moment, man and mountain lion regarded each other as equals. Two survivors, two fighters, two beings who'd chosen to keep going even when giving up would have been easier. "There you are," Levi said softly. "There's the fighter." Brave took one tentative step, then another. Its legs trembled with the effort, but it made it to the water bowl Levi had set out and drank on its own for the first time. The simple act felt monumental. That night Levi slept more soundly than he had in weeks. When he woke just before dawn, he found Brave watching him from across the cabin. Not with fear or aggression, but with something that looked almost like curiosity. Like it was trying to figure out this strange human who'd brought it to this place and refused to let it die. "Hey, Brave," Levi said, finally speaking the name aloud. "That's what I'm calling you. On account of you being the toughest creature I've met in a long while." The lion's ears twitched at the sound of his voice. It didn't move away or growl. It just watched. On the 7th day, a storm rolled in. Levi had been watching the clouds build since morning, recognizing the particular darkness that promised heavy rain. He'd gathered extra wood and secured anything outside that might blow away. By afternoon, the rain came down in sheets and lightning cracked across the sky. The storm brought back memories. Sarah had loved storms, said they cleansed the world, made everything new. They'd often sat on their porch together watching lightning dance across the valley, her hand in his, neither of them needing to speak. In those moments, the world had felt complete. Brave didn't like the storm. Each thunder crack made the lion flinch, and the flashes of lightning reflected in its wide eyes. It retreated to the farthest corner and curled into itself, a wild thing afraid of nature's fury, despite being born to it. Levi found himself moving closer, talking in a low, steady voice. "It's all right. Just noise and light. Can't hurt you in here." He sat with his back against the wall, near enough that Brave could see him, but not so close as to crowd the animal. Sarah used to say storms were the sky's way of letting go of what it had been holding in. Like crying, but bigger. I never understood what she meant by that until after she was gone. The lion's breathing gradually slowed. Its eyes remained fixed on Levi, as if his presence provided a kind of anchor in the chaos of the storm. "I haven't cried since she died," Levi continued, surprised to be speaking these thoughts aloud. "Not at the funeral, not after. I think I was afraid that if I started, I'd never stop. So I just kept it all in, kept moving, kept working. Didn't help much, just made everything feel hollow." Thunder rolled overhead, shaking the cabin. Rain drummed on the roof like countless fingers, but this, taking care of you, it's the first time I felt anything besides empty. The first time I've felt like maybe there's still a reason to get up in the morning. He touched the ring through his shirt. "She'd probably tell me I'm using you as a distraction, that I need to deal with my grief properly. But I think she'd also understand. She saved things too. It's how she made sense of the world. The storm raged through the night. Levi dozed fitfully, waking often to check on Brave, to add wood to the fire, to listen to the wild symphony outside. Sometime near dawn, he woke to find that Brave had moved closer to him, not touching, but near enough that he could feel the animal's warmth, hear its steady breathing. The storm had passed. In the grey light of morning, he could see that Brave was watching him again, but different now. The wariness had softened into something else. Not trust exactly, that would take more time, but a recognition that they were sharing this space, this experience, this slow journey toward healing. Levi reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement. His hand stopped a foot from Brave's head. The lion studied his hand, then, tentatively, carefully, leaned forward and touched its nose to Levi's palm. The contact lasted only a second before Brave pulled back, but it was enough. Something had shifted between them. A wall had come down. "We're going to make it," Levi whispered. "Both of us, somehow." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, sending shafts of golden light through the cabin windows. The forest dripped and steamed. Birds began to sing. And in the old trapping cabin high in the mountains, a man and a mountain lion began to understand that healing wasn't something you did alone. It was something you did together. One small victory at a time. Doc Harriet arrived that afternoon, surprising them both. She'd made the difficult drive up the mountain in her old truck, bringing more supplies and her professional concern. "I told myself I'd give you a week," she said, setting down her medical bag on the table. "After that, I'd come check to make sure you were still alive." "We're both still here," Levi said. Doc Harriet approached Brave slowly, her experienced eyes taking in every detail. The lion watched her but didn't panic, secure in the space it had claimed. "Well, I'll be damned," she said quietly. "It actually might make it. The fever's down. It's eating, drinking on its own. Still weak, but improving. You did good work here, Levi." She knelt to examine Brave more closely, checking its eyes, ears, listening to its breathing. "Sarah would be proud." "Hell, I'm proud, and you know I don't say that lightly." The words settled over Levi like a benediction. He hadn't realized how much he'd needed to hear them until they were spoken. "Recovery is going to take weeks more," Doc continued. "And even when it's physically healed, you'll have to figure out what comes next. You can't keep a mountain lion as a pet, I know. Do you? Because I see the way you look at that animal. Like it's not just a patient anymore." Levi didn't answer. He couldn't explain that Brave had become more than that, had become a living reminder that broken things could heal, that fighting was worthwhile, that there was still beauty and purpose to be found even in grief. Doc Harriet stood and brushed off her knees. "Just remember, it's wild. Its nature isn't going to change, no matter how much care you give it. When the time comes, you'll have to let it go." "I know," Levi said again. But deep in his heart, he wasn't sure he was ready for that truth yet. Sheriff Dalton arrived on a Tuesday morning, his expression grave. Levi had been working with Brave on physical therapy, encouraging the lion to walk short distances around the cabin, rebuilding strength in muscles that had atrophied during the worst of the illness. They'd made remarkable progress. Brave could now move around easily, even showing flashes of the power and grace that defined its species. "Ray," Levi said, straightening up, "didn't expect to see you out here." The sheriff removed his hat, turning it in his hands, a nervous gesture Levi had never seen from the normally unflappable man. "I need to show you something." "Wish I didn't, but you ought to know what's happening in town." He pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket and handed it to Levi. It was a petition, printed neatly at the top with the title, "Demand for Action Regarding Levi Brandt and the Mountain Lion." Below that, 47 signatures in various hands. Levi scanned the document. The petitioners demanded either his immediate return to town for proper quarantine and medical evaluation, or the immediate destruction of the mountain lion. They cited concerns about disease transmission, danger to livestock, and the irresponsibility of allowing a wild predator to live in close proximity to the valley. 47 people, Levi said quietly. "That's half the town. More than half showed up to the meeting," Sheriff Dalton admitted. "Some signed, some didn't. But there's real worry, Levi. Cattle on the Henderson property came down with something last week. Respiratory issues, fever. Doc Harriet says it's not related, that it's a different strain of something cattle get all the time. But people are scared. They're looking for something to blame, so they blame me. They blame the situation. You defied the town's will. You took a sick animal into the wilderness during a time when everyone's already on edge about disease and money and keeping their families safe. They think you were reckless. Levi looked at Brave, who was watching the conversation with alert eyes. I saved a life. That's not reckless. I know. And for what it's worth, I agree with you. Sheriff Dalton sighed. But I'm here in an official capacity, too. Mayor Pierce wants me to give you 2 weeks. If the lion isn't gone by then, either released back into the wild, or if it's not fit for release, euthanized, he's going to order me to come up here and handle it myself. You'd do that? I'd have to. It's the law, Levi. The mayor has authority in matters of public safety. Levi folded the petition and handed it back. Brave isn't ready to be released. Another month, maybe 2, and then we can talk about it. But not now. It's still recovering. Then what's your plan? Keep it here forever? I don't know. The admission cost him. I'm just trying to get through each day. Sheriff Dalton put his hat back on. I can give you the 2 weeks. After that, my hands are tied. I'm sorry. After the sheriff left, Levi sat on the cabin's porch, staring out at the forest. The weight of the situation pressed down on him. He'd known there would be consequences for his choice. But seeing the signatures, seeing the names of people he'd known for decades, people Sarah had helped, people he'd worked alongside, that made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Brave came to the door, moving silently despite its size. The lion had taken to following Levi around the cabin, maintaining a respectful distance, but always present. Now it settled on the porch beside him, its amber eyes scanning the tree line, with the alertness of a predator healing into its true nature. What am I supposed to do with you? Levi asked aloud. Can't keep you. Can't let them kill you. Can't release you until you're strong enough to survive on your own. The lion, of course, provided no answers. 3 days later, Doc Harriet returned with more troubling news and an unexpected companion. Emma Whitmore climbed out of the passenger seat of Doc's truck, carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. Before you say anything, Doc Harriet began, I didn't want to bring her, she insisted. Threatened to walk up here on her own if I didn't drive her. Emma's face was set with determination that reminded Levi of Sarah. I wanted to see Brave, and I brought supplies. Sandwiches. Fresh bread, some vegetables from our garden. Does your mother know you're here? Levi asked. Emma's expression faltered. She's having a bad day. The medicine makes her sleep a lot. She doesn't know I left, Doc Harriet sighed. Her mother has the same cancer Sarah had. Late stage. Emma's been caring for her mostly on her own, while trying to keep up with school and everything else. The information hit Levi hard. He knew Emma's mother, Martha Whitmore, a kind woman who'd sewn the curtains for his cabin years ago, who'd brought casseroles after Sarah's funeral. The thought of her suffering the same way Sarah had suffered, of Emma watching her mother fade the way he'd watched his wife, made his chest tighten. I'm sorry, Emma. I didn't know it had gotten that bad. Nobody really talks about it, Emma said quietly. They don't know what to say, so they mostly just avoid us. She brightened slightly. But I wanted to tell you what you're doing here, saving Brave even when everyone said you shouldn't. It matters. It gives me hope that maybe good things can still happen, even when everything seems terrible. Levi had no response to that. He simply nodded and gestured toward the cabin. Come on, I'll introduce you properly. Inside, Brave lifted its head at the newcomers. Emma gasped softly, her eyes wide with wonder. Oh, she breathed. Oh, it's beautiful. Levi corrected gently. I'm pretty sure Brave is male, based on his size. Emma approached slowly, following Levi's quiet instructions. No sudden movements. Let the animal see you clearly. Speak in a calm voice. To Levi's surprise, Brave didn't retreat. The lion watched the girl with curiosity, its ears forward, its posture relaxed. Hey, Brave, Emma said softly. Thank you for not dying. Thank you for fighting. Something in her voice, or perhaps in her gentle presence, seemed to reach the lion. Brave rose and padded closer, stopping just out of arm's reach. Emma held perfectly still. After a moment, Brave touched his nose to her outstretched hand. The same gesture of tentative connection he'd made with Levi weeks ago. Emma's eyes filled with tears. He's going to make it, isn't he? He's really going to survive. Yes, Levi said. I believe he will. Doc Harriet cleared her throat from the doorway. Which brings us to the problem of what happens next. Emma told me about the petition on the drive up. Half the town thinks you're a danger to them. The other half is just scared. And you've got 2 weeks before the situation gets forced. I know. So what are you going to do? Levi watched Emma and Brave together. A young girl facing the slow death of her mother, and a wild animal that had fought its way back from the edge. 2 beings who understood suffering and resilience in ways most people never would. I'm going to keep my promise, he said finally. I'm going to see this through, whatever it takes. And I'm going to prove to that town that some things are worth the risk. Doc Harriet studied him for a long moment. You know I'll back you. Privately, at least. But I can't openly defy the town council. I have a practice to maintain. I'm not asking you to. What about you, Emma? Doc turned to the girl. Your mother needs you. You can't be running up here all the time. I know. Emma's voice was small but steady. But maybe I could help sometimes. I could bring supplies or help with cleaning or just be here. So Mr. Brandt knows he's not alone. Levi felt something crack open in his chest, some wall he'd built around his heart to protect it from further breaking. That would be welcome, he managed to say. That would be very welcome. After Doc Harriet and Emma left, Levi sat at the cabin's table and unfolded the petition again, reading through the names. Some he understood, people with large cattle operations who genuinely feared disease. Some surprised him, neighbors he'd helped over the years, people he'd thought were friends, but as he read, he noticed something else. 3 of the names had been crossed out with different colored ink, and new signatures had been added in the margins, people declining to support the petition. Not many, but some. A few voices saying, no, we trust Levi. We believe in what he's doing. It wasn't much, but it was something. That night, as he settled in by the fire with Brave resting nearby, Levi pulled out a piece of paper and began to write. Not a defense of his actions or an argument against the petition. Just a letter explaining his choice, his reasons, and his belief that compassion wasn't weakness. It was the hardest kind of strength. He would send it to the town, to the newspaper if they'd print it, to anyone who would listen, and then he would wait to see what happened, trusting that somewhere in Dry Creek there were still enough people who remembered what Sarah had taught them, that the measure of a community wasn't how it dealt with strength, but how it responded to vulnerability. Outside, a coyote called. Brave's ears perked up, instinct pulling at him even in his domesticated convalescence. Soon, maybe sooner than Levi was ready for, the wild would call, and the lion would have to answer. But not yet. Not while there was still healing to be done, for both of them. A month had passed since Levi had carried a dying mountain lion up the mountain. Brave was now strong enough to move around the cabin freely, even venturing short distances into the forest during the day while remaining near enough that Levi could call him back. The transformation was remarkable, from a creature barely clinging to life to a powerful predator regaining its natural grace and confidence. Levi had just finished preparing Brave's morning meal when he heard the sound of an engine laboring up the mountain road. He stepped onto the porch surprised. Doc Harriet wasn't due for another visit, and Sheriff Dalton's 2-week deadline was still 3 days away. The vehicle that emerged from the tree line wasn't one he recognized, a Forest Service truck, newer and better maintained than anything Dry Creek could afford. A man in his 30s climbed out, dressed in ranger greens, carrying a weathered pack and what looked like a map case. Levi Brandt? The man called out, "That's right, name's Carson, wildlife officer with the state. Mind if I come up?" Levi's instincts prickled with caution. Official visitors rarely brought good news. "Depends on why you're here." Carson approached slowly, hands visible and non-threatening. I've been tracking an environmental situation in these mountains for the past 6 months. Word reach me that you've been nursing a sick mountain lion back to health. I'd like to see it if you'll allow it. I promise I'm not here to cause trouble." Something in the man's tone, earnest rather than authoritative, made Levi relax slightly. "Come on up." Inside, Brave raised his head at the stranger but didn't retreat. Carson's eyes widened. "That's the one they wanted to shoot in Dry Creek?" "Same one." "It's magnificent." Carson set down his pack carefully, respecting the space between himself and the lion. "And you were right, it wasn't rabies. Distemper?" "That's what I thought initially." Doc Harriet confirmed it. Carson's expression shifted to something more serious. "That's why I'm here. Mr. Brandt, what if I told you it might not have been distemper at all?" Levi frowned. The symptoms matched perfectly. High fever, respiratory distress, neurological effects, all of which can also be caused by toxin exposure. Carson pulled out his map case and unrolled a large topographical map across the cabin's table. The map was marked with dozens of colored pins and handwritten notes. "For the last 6 months, I've been documenting an ecological collapse in this mountain range. Dead fish in the streams, birds falling from trees, and mountain lions, sick or dead mountain lions. 7 confirmed cases before your Brave here." He pointed to various marks on the map. "Here, here, and here, all within a 15-mile radius, all showing the same symptoms you described. But here's what's interesting. It's not distemper. It's pesticide poisoning." The words hung in the air like smoke. Levi stared at the map, trying to process what he was hearing. Pesticide? But nobody uses pesticides up this high. There's nothing to spray. Not intentionally, no. Carson pulled out photographs from his pack. Streams with dead fish, soil samples in vials, documentation of testing procedures. But 3 miles upstream from here, there's a chemical processing plant, Harcourt Industrial. They produce commercial pesticides for agricultural use, the kind that gets shipped all over the state. "I know the plant," Levi said slowly. "It's the biggest employer in the region. Half the men in Dry Creek work there." "Right. And for the past 2 years, they've been illegally dumping chemical waste into the watershed." Carson's voice hardened with anger. "Not openly. They've been doing it at night in small quantities, thinking it would dilute enough that no one would notice. But the chemicals are persistent. They accumulate in soil, in water, in the tissue of animals that drink from contaminated streams." Levi felt sick. "The mountain lion wandered into town because it was poisoned." "Exactly. The neurological effects mimic distemper, confusion, loss of fear of humans, seizures. The respiratory issues come from chemical irritation. The symptoms are nearly identical, which is why it was misdiagnosed." Carson gestured to Brave. "Your lion here is the first confirmed survivor. Every other mountain lion we've found was either dead or had to be euthanized. Which means you didn't just save one animal, you created living proof that recovery is possible with proper treatment." The implications began to sink in. "You're building a case against Harcourt." "I am, but I need your help." Carson pulled out a folder thick with documents. "Your testimony about finding Brave, treating him, documenting his recovery, that's evidence. Physical evidence of the harm these chemicals are causing, combined with my environmental samples and the pattern of contamination. We can prove Harcourt has been poisoning this entire ecosystem. What happens if you prove it?" "They get shut down." "Heavy fines. Possible criminal charges for the executives who authorized the dumping. Mandatory cleanup that could take years." Carson met Levi's eyes. "And yes, that means hundreds of people in Dry Creek lose their jobs." Levi walked to the window, his mind racing. The town was already struggling. Losing Harcourt would devastate the local economy. Families would have to move away. Businesses would close. And the community that had existed for generations might not survive. But the alternative was allowing a company to continue poisoning the land, killing wildlife and potentially threatening human health. How long before the contamination reached Dry Creek's water supply? How long before children were affected? "There's more," Carson said quietly. "I've been reviewing medical records, anonymously, nothing that violates privacy. But the cancer rates in Dry Creek are significantly higher than the state average, particularly cancers related to chemical exposure. Sarah... The thought hit Levi like a physical blow. Sarah had died of cancer, a particularly aggressive form that had baffled her doctors with its rapid progression. And Martha Whitmore, Emma's mother, had the same type. Were they victims of the same poison that had nearly killed Brave? "I need to sit down," Levi said, his voice rough. Carson gave him space, continuing to lay out the evidence. "I'm not asking you to decide right now, but I am asking you to think about it. Brave's recovery, your records of his treatment, his current health, could be the key that makes this case ironclad. Without it, Harcourt's lawyers might find a way to muddy the waters. Claim the evidence is inconclusive." Brave padded over to Levi and pressed his head against Levi's leg, an unusual gesture of comfort that the lion had only recently begun to offer. Levi's hand fell automatically to stroke the cat's head, feeling the power in the muscles beneath the fur. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Levi asked. "If you've known for 6 months, I needed proof. Environmental cases are complicated. I couldn't go public until I had documentation that would hold up in court. And I didn't know about Brave until 3 days ago when I heard about the situation in Dry Creek." Carson's expression softened. "You did something remarkable here, Mr. Brandt. You saved a life that everyone else wanted to end." "That took courage. It took stubbornness," Levi corrected. "And grief. I couldn't save my wife. Maybe I just needed to save something. Maybe. But the result is the same. You have a healthy mountain lion and documentation of a recovery that shouldn't have been possible, with distemper. Because it wasn't distemper." Levi stood and walked to the porch, needing air. The mountains stretched out before him, beautiful and poisoned. How many other animals had died without anyone noticing? How many more would die if nothing changed? Behind him, he heard Carson packing up his materials. "I'll leave you my contact information. Take a few days to think about it. But, Mr. Brandt, the town has given you 2 weeks to release that lion or put it down. They did that because they're afraid of disease, of danger, of things they don't understand. But what if they knew the truth? What if they knew the real threat isn't that mountain lion? It's the company they've been trusting with their livelihoods." After Carson left, Levi sat with Brave on the porch for a long time. The lion seemed to sense his turmoil, staying close without pressing for attention. Together they watched the sun move across the sky, casting shadows that lengthened and shifted, like the complications of the choice before him. That evening, Sheriff Dalton arrived, his expression grim. "I heard you had a visitor from Fish and Wildlife." "News travels fast." Carson stopped in town. "Told Mayor Pierce the basics about the investigation. Mayor's having an emergency council meeting tomorrow night." The sheriff sat heavily on the porch steps. "Word's already spreading. People are divided. Some are angry at Harcourt. Some are angry at Carson for threatening their jobs. Most are just scared. What about you?" Sheriff Dalton was quiet for a moment. "My wife has thyroid cancer. Started 2 years ago, same time as Sarah and Martha. Never thought much of it. Cancer happens, right? But now I'm wondering. And I'm angry, Levi. If there's even a chance that company made her sick, made all of them sick." His voice broke. "I want them to pay. Testifying means choosing between justice and people's livelihoods. Maybe. Or maybe it means giving people the truth and trusting them to figure out what comes next." Sheriff Dalton stood, putting his hat back on. "You've got 3 days before my deadline. But I'm thinking that deadline just became the least of anyone's worries." That night, Levi lay awake, Sarah's wedding ring pressed between his fingers. He could almost hear her voice, patient and wise, reminding him that doing the right thing was rarely the easy thing. She'd never been one to avoid difficult truths or uncomfortable choices. Beside him, Brave slept, his breathing deep and even. A living miracle, saved through stubborn care and sheer determination. But also evidence that could bring down a company, devastate a town, and perhaps prevent future suffering. Levi had thought his choice was simple: save the lion or let it die. But like everything in life, the truth was more complicated. His choice now would ripple far beyond this cabin, touching lives he'd never meet. changing the future of a community he'd called home for 30 years. He just had to decide if he was brave enough to make it. The letter arrived the next morning, slipped under the cabin door during the night while Levi slept. A single sheet of paper, no signature, typed on a plain white page. Drop the investigation or face consequences. Your cooperation with Carson will destroy this community and ruin innocent families. If you truly care about Dry Creek, you'll stay silent. This is your only warning. Levi read it twice, his hands steady despite the anger building in his chest. The threat was clear, even without specific details. Someone, likely connected to Harcourt, Industrial, had learned he was considering testifying and wanted to intimidate him into silence. They'd chosen the wrong man. He showed the letter to Sheriff Dalton when the lawman arrived later that morning. Ray's face darkened as he read. This is criminal intimidation. I can investigate and find what? No signature, probably untraceable. Whoever sent this made sure they couldn't be connected to it. Levi took the letter back. But it tells me something important. They're worried. If they weren't, they wouldn't bother threatening me. Worried enough to be dangerous. Levi, you need to take this seriously. I am, but I'm not backing down. Over the next 2 days, the pressure intensified. Doc Harriet's veterinary office was vandalized. Windows broken, files scattered. A crude message painted on the door. Stop helping him. Emma showed up at the cabin in tears, reporting that her mother's cancer treatment fund, donations collected by the community, had been frozen pending review of allocation priorities by the town council. The implication was clear. Help Levi, and your mother loses her medical support. Mayor Pierce called an emergency town meeting for that evening. Levi knew he had to attend, had to face the community and explain his position. Carson would be there too, presenting his evidence formally. It was time to force the issue into the open, regardless of the consequences. But first, he had to address the immediate problem. Brave. The lion was now healthy enough to survive in the wild, though ideally he'd benefit from a few more weeks of steady feeding and monitored recovery. More importantly, bringing Brave to a town meeting was risky, both for the lion and for Levi's case. A frightened animal in a crowded space could undo months of careful work in seconds. Yet Levi knew the power of visual evidence. People could dismiss reports and testimony. They couldn't dismiss a living, thriving mountain lion that everyone had wanted dead. What do you think? He asked Brave, who sat on the porch watching the morning light filter through the trees. Ready to face a crowd of people who don't understand you? Brave's ears twitched. Over the past weeks, the lion had developed an uncanny ability to sense Levi's moods, to respond to the subtle cues of body language and tone. The bond between them had deepened beyond patient and caretaker into something more complex. Not quite the relationship between man and dog, but not purely wild either. A partnership of mutual respect born from shared survival. The truth was, Levi would have to let Brave go soon, regardless of what happened with the investigation. The lion was a wild creature, not meant for captivity or domestication. Already Brave spent hours staring at the tree line, his body tensing at distant sounds, his instincts calling him back to the life he was born for. But not yet. Not until Levi had finished what he'd started. Doc Harriet arrived mid-morning, her jaw set with determination, despite the vandalism she'd suffered. "I'm going with you tonight," she announced. "And I'm testifying about Brave's recovery, about the chemical markers in his blood work that I should have recognized earlier but didn't, because I wasn't looking for pesticide poisoning. They threatened you, Harriet. They destroyed your office, they did. And that just makes me more determined to see this through." She pulled out a folder of medical records. "I've been reviewing every large animal case I've treated in the past 3 years. The patterns are there, Levi. Livestock dying of mysterious respiratory issues, pets with neurological symptoms, wildlife deaths that we attributed to natural causes. It's all connected to the watershed contamination." Emma appeared in the afternoon, her face pale but resolute. "I want to speak tonight too. Emma, no. My mother is dying because someone poisoned the water she drank for 20 years. Emma's voice shook but didn't break. I've been reading everything I can find about chemical contamination and cancer. The timeline matches. The cancer types match. Harcourt killed my mother, Mr. Brandt. They just did it slowly enough that no one noticed. Levi felt the weight of her grief, recognized it as a mirror of his own. If you speak, they might... I don't care what they might do. I care about the truth. And I care about making sure no other kid has to watch their mom die the way I'm watching mine. She lifted her chin. Besides, I promised Brave I'd be brave too. Seems like now's the time to keep that promise. By late afternoon, Carson had arrived with several federal agents and a truck full of evidence, water samples, soil tests, photographic documentation of the contamination spread. He set up in a corner of the cabin, organizing his presentation with methodical precision. Harcourt's lawyers will be there, he warned. They'll try to discredit everything we say. They'll claim the evidence is circumstantial, that correlation doesn't prove causation, that shutting down the plant will hurt more people than the alleged contamination. It's not alleged, Levi said quietly. It's real. Brave is proof. Brave is our strongest evidence. But we need to present him carefully. If he seems aggressive or dangerous, it plays into their narrative that you were irresponsible, that the town was right to want him killed. He won't be aggressive, not unless someone threatens him or me. Carson studied the lion, who was resting in a patch of sunlight near the door. I hope you're right. A lot depends on tonight going smoothly. As the sun began to set, Levi prepared for the journey down the mountain. He'd built a crate for Brave weeks ago, training the lion to enter it willingly as part of his rehabilitation exercises. Now he lined it with familiar blankets and coaxed Brave inside, speaking in the low, steady voice the cat had learned to trust. Just for a little while, Levi promised. Then we'll come back, and you can decide what comes next. Deal? Brave settled in the crate without resistance, though his eyes remained alert, tracking every movement. Levi secured the crate in his truck bed and covered it with a tarp to reduce stress from the journey. Doc Harriet, Emma, and Carson followed in their own vehicles, a small convoy heading down from the mountains toward whatever awaited them in Dry Creek. The sun was setting as they reached town, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The church, the only building large enough for a full town meeting, blazed with light. Every parking space was filled, and people stood outside smoking and talking in tight clusters. The mood was tense, conversations stopping as Levi's truck rolled past. He parked behind the church, where Carson had arranged for a secure area. Several federal agents helped unload Brave's crate, moving it into a storage room with strong doors and good ventilation. Brave growled softly at the unfamiliar surroundings, but Levi stayed close, his presence a calming anchor. I'll stay with him until it's time, Levi told Carson. He needs to know I'm not abandoning him. Inside the church, he could hear the meeting beginning, Mayor Pierce calling for order, voices raised in argument even before the formal proceedings started. Through the wall, the chaos of human fear and anger seeped through, and Levi felt the enormity of what he'd set in motion. Doc Harriet poked her head into the storage room. They want Carson to present first. Then testimony from witnesses. Then they're going to let Harcourt's people speak. Her face was tight with controlled anger. The company brought their chief operating officer, their head of environmental compliance, and 3 lawyers. They're not taking this lightly. Neither are we. No, but Levi, they're going to come after you personally. Your credibility, your mental state after Sarah's death, your ability to accurately assess the lion's condition. They're going to try to paint you as a grief-stricken man who made reckless decisions and is now trying to justify them by blaming an innocent company. Let them try. Levi's voice was calm. I know what I did and why. I know what Brave survived, and I know the truth when I see it. Emma appeared next, her young face set with determination that aged her beyond her 12 years. Mr. Brandt, it's almost time. Carson's finishing his presentation now. Levi stood and placed his hand on Brave's crate, ready to show them what survival looks like. The lion's golden eyes met his through the bars, aware, alert, trusting. Whatever happened in the next hours, they would face it together. A man who'd learned to fight against grief and despair, and a wild creature who'd refused to surrender to poison and death. They'd both survived impossible odds. Now they'd find out if that was enough to change the minds and hearts of an entire town. The door to the main hall opened, and Mayor Pierce's amplified voice called out, "We'll now hear testimony from Levi Brandt regarding the mountain lion and his involvement with the ongoing investigation." Levi took a deep breath, touched Sarah's ring through his shirt one last time for strength, and walked toward the light and noise of the gathered community, toward judgment, toward truth, and toward whatever reckoning awaited them all. The church hall was packed beyond capacity. Every pew was filled, people lined the walls, and more crowded in the doorway trying to hear. The air was thick with tension, and the smell of bodies pressed too close together. At the front, Mayor Pierce sat at a long table with Sheriff Dalton and 3 town council members. Carson stood at a podium, his evidence boards displayed behind him showing maps, graphs, and photographs of contaminated sites. Levi walked down the center aisle slowly, feeling every eye on him. Some faces showed support. Doc Harriet nodded encouragingly from her seat, and Emma gave him a small wave. But many showed anger, fear, or outright hostility. He recognized men who worked at Harcourt Industrial, families whose livelihoods depended on that paycheck, people who saw him as a direct threat to their survival. He reached the podium and set down a small wooden frame he'd been carrying. Inside was a photograph of Sarah taken about 10 years earlier. She stood in their yard, holding a young deer with a splinted leg, her smile radiant with the joy of helping something broken become whole again. It was one of Levi's favorite pictures of her. It captured everything she'd been, compassionate, determined, full of life. "My wife Sarah died 2 years ago," Levi began, his voice quiet but carrying in the sudden silence. "Cancer took her, fast and mean, in a way that none of the doctors could fully explain. She was 56 years old, healthy all her life, no family history of cancer. But in 6 months, she went from fine to gone." He touched the frame gently. "Sarah taught me about healing. She showed me that every life has value, even the ones that seem lost or dangerous. When that mountain lion stumbled into our town square dying, everyone saw a threat. I saw what Sarah would have seen, a creature suffering that could be helped. 'We're not here to talk about your wife,' someone called out from the crowd." Levi recognized the voice. Jack Morrison, shift supervisor at Harcourt Industrial. "We're here to talk about you harboring a dangerous animal and cooperating with an investigation that's going to destroy this town." "Those things are connected," Levi said steadily. "And I'll explain how if you'll let me finish." Mayor Pierce banged his gavel. "Let him speak." Levi described finding the lion, recognizing the symptoms, making the choice to save it rather than shoot it. He talked about the weeks of care, the slow recovery, the moment when death's grip loosened and life started to win. He kept his language simple and clear, making sure everyone understood the medical progression. "I thought it was distemper," he said. "That's what the symptoms looked like. Doc Harriet thought the same. We were both wrong." He gestured to Carson. "Officer Carson has shown that the symptoms were actually caused by pesticide poisoning from chemicals illegally dumped into our watershed by Harcourt Industrial." The room erupted. Shouts of denial, angry accusations, people jumping to their feet. Mayor Pierce hammered his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. Through the chaos, Levi caught sight of the Harcourt representatives, 3 men in expensive suits sitting in the front row with expressions of professional concern that didn't quite mask their calculation. When the noise finally died down, Mayor Pierce pointed to the suits. "Harcourt will have their turn to respond. For now, Mr. Brandt has the floor," Levi continued, explaining how the lion's recovery had required months of intensive care, how the symptoms had gradually resolved with treatment, how the animal had transformed from dying to thriving. "That lion is alive because I refused to give up. And in saving it, I learned something that everyone in this room needs to hear." He paused, making sure he had their attention. The poison that nearly killed that mountain lion is the same poison that's been seeping into our water, our soil, our bodies for years. Carson has documentation of 7 other mountain lions that died from the same exposure. How many other animals have we lost without knowing why? How many livestock deaths have we blamed on disease when it was actually poisoning? This is speculation, one of the Harcourt lawyers called outstanding. Circumstantial evidence being presented as fact. Then explain my wife, Levi said, his voice hardening. Explain Martha Whitmore, who has the exact same cancer Sarah had. Explain Sheriff Dalton's wife. Explain the pattern of illness in this town that no one wanted to see because it was easier to look away. The lawyer started to respond, but Emma stood up from her pew, her voice cutting through the tension. Explain my mother, she said, tears streaming down her face. Explain why she's dying when she's only 42 years old and never smoked or drank or did anything wrong except live in this town and drink the water and trust that the people running that plant cared about something other than money. The room went silent. Emma's raw grief, her youth, her courage, it stripped away the abstract arguments and made the situation viscerally real. This wasn't about economics or regulations. It was about mothers dying, about families being destroyed, about trust being betrayed. Levi looked at the photograph of Sarah on the podium. She was smiling in that picture, full of hope and purpose. She'd saved countless animals in her life, had made the world better in small but meaningful ways. And someone had taken that from her, from him, from everyone who'd loved her. I'm not here to destroy this town, Levi said quietly. I'm here to save it. Because if we let Harcourt continue operating the way they have been, there won't be a town left to save. The land will be poisoned beyond recovery. More people will get sick. More families will be broken. And we'll have no one to blame but ourselves for choosing comfort over truth. You have proof of this? Mayor Pierce asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. Carson has scientific evidence. I have testimony and medical records. And I have one more thing. Levi looked toward the storage room door. I have a living, healthy mountain lion that shouldn't have survived what was done to it. Would you like to meet it? The murmur that ran through the crowd held equal parts fear and curiosity. Several people near the back edged toward the door. Others leaned forward, wanting to see despite themselves. Mayor Pierce looked uncertain, glancing at Sheriff Dalton, who gave a subtle nod. Bring it in, the mayor said, but slowly. And if there's any danger, there won't be. Levi walked back to the storage room, his heart steady despite the magnitude of the moment. He opened the door to find Brave pacing the small space, agitated by the noise and unfamiliar surroundings. Easy, boy. I know it's loud. I know it's strange. But I need you to trust me one more time. He opened the crate door. Brave emerged cautiously, his muscles tense, his ears swiveling to track the chaos of sound beyond the wall. For a moment, Levi wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. The lion was healthy now, powerful, fully capable of doing serious harm if frightened or provoked. But then Brave's eyes found Levi's, and something settled in the animal. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. He moved to Levi's side, maintaining contact, drawing comfort from the familiar presence. Together, they walked back into the main hall. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Gasps rippled through the crowd. People stood for a better view. Children pressed against their parents, eyes wide with wonder and fear. And in that moment, everyone could see the truth of what Levi had accomplished. This was not a sick, dying animal foaming at the mouth. This was a magnificent creature in the prime of its life. Sleek, powerful, moving with the fluid grace that defined its species. The tawny coat gleamed in the lamplight. The amber eyes were clear and alert. Every inch of the lion radiated health and vitality. This is Brave, Levi said into the stunned silence. 6 weeks ago you wanted him dead. You called him a danger, a disease risk, a threat that had to be eliminated. You were wrong. He walked slowly down the aisle with Brave at his side, letting people see clearly. The lion remained calm, though his muscles stayed coiled with readiness. His gaze swept the crowd with predatory awareness, but he made no aggressive moves. no threats. He simply existed, a wild thing in a human space, neither tame nor violent. Every person in this room has seen sick animals, Levi continued. You know what dying looks like. You know the difference between an animal that's too far gone and one that might make it. He stopped in front of the Harcourt representatives. Look at him and tell me he was meant to die. The men in suits stared at the mountain lion with expressions that ranged from discomfort to barely concealed alarm. One of them, the chief operating officer, recovered his composure first. It's an impressive recovery, Mr. Brandt. No one is denying that. But one animal's survival doesn't prove systematic contamination. It doesn't prove Harcourt did anything wrong. Then explain this. Doc Harriet stood up, holding a manila folder. These are Brave's blood test results, taken when Levi first brought him to me and again 2 weeks ago. The first test showed elevated levels of organophosphate compounds, chemicals used in Harcourt's pesticide formulations. The second test shows those levels dropping as the chemicals cleared his system during recovery. She passed the folder to Carson, who held it up for the room to see. This is medical documentation that the lion was exposed to industrial chemicals that nearly killed him. Combined with the environmental samples showing the same chemicals in the watershed, the pattern of wildlife deaths, and the human health impacts, this is proof, not speculation. Our facility meets all environmental regulations, the Harcourt lawyer interjected, his voice sharp. We're inspected regularly. If there was contamination, the regulators would have found it. Your facility meets the regulations they check, Carson corrected. But you're not dumping waste during business hours when inspectors might see. You're doing it at night, in quantities small enough that you thought no one would notice until it was too late. He pulled out photographs, grainy nighttime images showing trucks at the plant's back fence, hoses running to the creek, federal surveillance over the past month. We have dates, times, and chemical analysis of the discharge. You've been caught. The room erupted again, but this time the anger wasn't directed at Levi. People were turning to the Harcourt representatives, voices raised in accusation and betrayal. Jack Morrison, the shift supervisor, stood with his hands clenched at his sides. You told us the plant was safe. You told us we were protecting the environment. We are investigating these allegations, the chief operating officer said stiffly. Until a full review is completed, no. Sheriff Dalton rose from his seat at the front table, his badge catching the light. I've heard enough. Mayor, I'm recommending we vote tonight on whether to support the federal investigation and cooperate fully with their prosecution of Harcourt Industrial. Mayor Pierce looked around the room, reading the mood of his community. Whatever political calculations he'd been making earlier had shifted. I'll second that recommendation. All in favor of supporting the federal investigation into Harcourt Industrial's environmental practices, say aye. The response was overwhelming. I rang out from every corner of the church, from workers and ranchers, from mothers and fathers, from people who'd signed the petition against Levi and people who'd supported him from the start. The unity was sudden and complete, a community deciding that truth mattered more than temporary comfort. Opposed. Mayor Pierce asked, though it was pure formality, silence. Even the Harcourt representatives said nothing, recognizing they'd lost. The measure passes unanimously, the mayor declared. This town will cooperate fully with the investigation. And Harcourt Industrial, you're no longer welcome here. Levi felt something break open in his chest, not grief this time, but relief so profound it nearly brought him to his knees. Brave pressed against his leg, sensing the emotion, offering the same silent support Levi had given him through weeks of recovery. Emma pushed through the crowd and threw her arms around Levi, sobbing. Thank you. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for being brave enough for all of us. Doc Harriet joined them. Then Sheriff Dalton, then others, people who'd doubted, people who'd supported, all of them united now in the recognition that something important had shifted. The town had chosen truth over fear, justice over convenience. They'd found their courage by watching a man refuse to abandon a dying animal, By seeing that compassion and strength weren't opposites but two sides of the same coin, through it all, Brave remained calm and steady, a wild heart in a room full of humans. Proof that broken things could heal if someone cared enough to try. 3 months later, spring arrived in the mountains with a gentleness that felt like forgiveness. The snow melted from the high peaks, feeding streams that ran clear and cold. Wildflowers pushed through the warming earth, painting the meadows in colors that had seemed impossible during the long winter. And in those streams, in that soil, the slow work of healing had begun. Levi stood on the newly built porch of what was no longer just a trapping cabin, but the headquarters of the Dry Creek Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. The transformation had happened faster than he'd imagined possible. Once the federal investigation concluded, Harcourt Industrial shut down, its executives facing criminal charges. A massive settlement fund established for cleanup and community compensation. People had rallied around a new vision for the valley's future. The settlement money had funded Emma's mother's treatment at a hospital 3 hours away. Martha Whitmore was responding well, the cancer retreating under aggressive therapy that the family never could have afforded otherwise. Emma visited her mother every weekend, and during the week, she spent her afternoons at the Wildlife Center, learning from Doc Harriet and Levi about animal care and rehabilitation. She was there now, helping feed a young owl with a broken wing. Her laughter carried across the yard as the owl attempted to intimidate her with its fiercest stare. "Mr. Brandt," she called out, "I think this one's going to be harder to release than Brave was." The mention of Brave's name made Levi smile. The mountain lion had been officially released back into the wild 6 weeks ago, in a ceremony attended by wildlife officers, news reporters, and half the town. Levi had opened the transport crate in a remote meadow 10 miles from any human settlement, and Brave had emerged cautiously, testing the air, remembering what it meant to be free. The lion had looked back at Levi once, a long, steady gaze that seemed to hold acknowledgement, gratitude, and farewell all at once. Then he turned and padded into the forest, his tawny coat blending with the underbrush until he disappeared completely. Levi had expected that to be the end of their connection. Wild animals, once released, rarely returned to human contact. But Brave proved to be exceptional in this as in everything else. Twice in the past month, Levi had spotted the lion watching the wildlife center from a distant ridge, his distinctive scar visible even from far away. Once, Brave had come down to the stream that ran through the property, drinking while Levi sat quietly on a rock 50 yards away. They'd shared the space peacefully, neither approaching the other, both content with the distance and the connection. The wildlife center had become something remarkable. Doc Harriet had closed her practice in town and moved her operations here full-time, finding renewed purpose in helping wildlife recover from injuries and illness. Sheriff Dalton, whose wife was also in remission thanks to the settlement money, had helped secure proper licensing and support from state wildlife agencies. Volunteers from town came regularly to help with construction, maintenance, and animal care. What had started as one man trying to save one dying lion had grown into a community project that gave Dry Creek a new identity. Tour groups came from across the state to learn about the rehabilitation work. School children visited for educational programs. Families hiked the trails Levi and volunteers had built through the property. The town was discovering that protecting the land could be more profitable than poisoning it. Mayor Pierce had been re-elected, running on a platform of sustainable development and environmental protection. The Harcourt plant site was being transformed into a solar farm that would eventually employ 30 people. Not as many jobs as before, but clean ones that wouldn't slowly kill the community. Several former Harcourt workers had retrained for positions in environmental remediation, now helping undo the damage they'd unknowingly contributed to. Levi walked down to the meadow where he and Sarah had scattered her ashes. The wildflowers were particularly thick this year, their colors vivid against the green grass. He'd brought fresh flowers from town, white roses, Sarah's favorite, and a copy of the deed that had been finalized yesterday. "The Dry Creek Wildlife Rehabilitation Center," he read aloud, running his fingers over the embossed seal. "Established in memory of Levi Brandt, who taught us that healing begins with compassion." He set the deed on the small stone marker they'd placed here. "We did it, Sarah. Took me a while to understand what you were trying to teach me, but I got there eventually." The wind carried the scent of pine and new growth. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. In the distance, he could hear Emma laughing and Doc Harriet's patient instructions about proper feeding techniques. "I'm not alone anymore," Levi continued. "I know that's what worried you most at the end, that I'd shut myself away and forget how to live. But I remembered, or maybe Brave reminded me. Sometimes I think you sent him to me, crazy as that sounds. A dying creature that needed saving just like I was." He touched Sarah's ring, still warm against his chest. "I'll always miss you. That hasn't changed. But the grief doesn't hollow me out like it used to. It's just part of me now, woven into everything else. The good memories, the work we're doing here, the lives we're saving. You'd like that, I think." Movement on the ridge caught his eye. Brave stood there, silhouetted against the afternoon sky. And beside him, Levi's breath caught another mountain lion. Smaller, female, moving with the same fluid grace. Brave had found a mate. The two lions stood together for a long moment, then turned and disappeared into the forest. New life, new possibilities, the continuation of something that had almost been lost forever. Levi felt tears on his face and let them fall. Not tears of grief this time, but of gratitude and wonder. For the second chance, for the community that had found its way back to its better nature, for the animals that would be saved in this place, for the legacy he and Sarah were building together, even though she wasn't here to see it. He gathered the roses and walked back toward the center, where work waited and people needed him. As he crested the hill, he could see the whole operation spread out below. New buildings, animal enclosures, the parking area where 2 tour buses were just arriving. A bustle of purpose and life, where there had been only isolation and decay. "Sometimes the things we abandon say more about us than what we save," he'd said at the beginning of this journey. But he understood now that the reverse was also true. What we choose to save, what we fight for, even when the odds seem impossible, that reveals who we really are. He'd saved a mountain lion, and in doing so he'd saved himself. He'd saved a town. He'd honored a promise to a woman he'd loved with everything he had. And he'd proved that compassion wasn't weakness or sentiment. It was the strongest force in the world, capable of healing wounds deeper than anyone imagined possible. The sun was setting now, painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber, the same color as Brave's eyes, as Sarah's hair in summer light, as hope when you held it up to the fading day. Levi walked down the hill toward the people waiting for him, toward the work that gave his life meaning, toward a future he'd never expected but was learning to embrace. Behind him, the meadow blazed with wildflowers. Ahead of him, voices called his name with warmth and welcome. And somewhere in the vast wilderness of the mountains, a mountain lion ran free, strong, healthy, alive. A survivor, a fighter, a reminder that broken things could heal if someone refused to give up on them. Just like Levi had refused to give up, just like Sarah would have wanted, just like love demanded.